have a member of this House stand up and actively try and mislead people in the province. You know, it is pathetic when parents who are dealing with questions associated with the health of their children are actively misled by a member of the legislature, Mr. Speaker. The budget for EIBI was $2 million. It's now $4 million, and we are ensuring that children who are on the autism spectrum are getting the support they need.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that this Premier did not keep the promise which said the EIBI program would move from $4 million to $8 million. It's right in the speech that I just tabled. That's exactly what was said. 2 years ago, this Premier made a grand announcement about EIBI support, and he has broken his word. He spoke about the unfairness of the lottery system for EIBI and how his government was going to fix it once and for all so no family would be denied. This Premier not only failed to fulfill his full commitment of doubling the EIBI budget to a full $8 million. He has cut the budget back to the 2005-06 level of $4 million. Mr. Speaker, obviously the Premier likes the flash of announcements, but when he thinks everyone's backs are turned, he decides it would be acceptable to balance the budget on the backs of autistic children and their families in this province. Mr. Speaker, the reality is children will wait from 2.5, 3 years after being diagnosed until they're 4 years old, get a little bit of help, not the entire EIBI program. If $4 million was insufficient to this government in 2011, why is it now all of a sudden adequate in 2013?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, you know, there are days in this House where I can't believe that a member of the House would try and prey on the parents of children who need services, Mr. Speaker. The reality is we made commitments. We made commitments to people which we stand by, which we keep. We ensure that the kids who need these services get them. Mr. Speaker, they have in their caucus a Minister of Health who, with respect to this, did absolutely nothing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are ensuring that there are appropriate services in place. We are living up to the commitments we made to those parents and to those kids, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, that caucus brought forward, Mr. Speaker, that caucus brought forward for us recommendations, for example, with respect to insulin pumps for kids, and then, Mr. Speaker, broke that commitment by voting against the very budget that implemented it. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to you is for the Deputy Premier. We learned last week that unemployment in Cape Breton had soared to 18.6%, and I'll table the document to back that up. Statistics Canada shows that provincially, we have an unemployment to job ratio of 15:1, and I'll table that document. So, Mr. Speaker, it's obvious that with such high unemployment in Cape Breton, that the ratio at home would be much higher than the provincial average. So my question to the Minister is, will the Minister admit that their economic plan has been an absolute disaster for the people of Cape Breton?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell that member what's been a disaster, Mr. Speaker. The taking of the Service Canada jobs, Mr. Speaker. Taking out services for veterans, that's a disaster. Mail service in North Sydney, that's a disaster, Mr. Speaker. That's who ruined our economy, is that party over there, and they love their federal brothers that are doing it, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised. All along I thought we were in the House of Assembly, not in the Parliament buildings of Canada. But I will say this, that it is true that he has created some jobs with the moving companies who are taking the people off of Cape Breton Island and moving them to other parts of Canada to work. Mr. Speaker, there are over 11,000, I repeat, 11,000 unemployed people in Cape Breton. Along with the jobs losses, people are also losing hope, Mr. Speaker. They're losing hope. Cape Breton's population has decreased by almost 4% in the last 4 years due to the hardships inflicted by this NDP government. So my question is this: will the minister admit that life is so tough in NDP-governed Cape Breton Island that hard-working people are being forced to leave their beautiful island?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will agree with hard-working people are being forced to leave. It's because of his federal cousins, Mr. Speaker. They will not stand up and represent the people that elected them, Mr. Speaker. They will get up there.
Order, please. The Honourable Deputy Premier has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must have struck a chord over there, Mr. Speaker. The fact is that they don't, when they are asked by the media, they distance themselves from their federal cousins. Oh, that's federal Tories. We're progressive conservatives, Mr. Speaker. They're all the same. They're all blue, and they will not do the true blue thing and look after Cape Breton. They look after conservatives first, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on his third final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's hard to believe that that member is actually from Cape Breton.
Blacked out the name.
The number of unemployed people has increased by almost 6% in the last 4 years in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. The NDP have created a perfect storm of high taxes, higher power rates, and no real plan for creating jobs. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the NDP budget shows that there is no plan for creating jobs. The budget actually allows for a forecast with more job losses. Their own budget, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister finally admit that in order to get our economy running again, we need to cut taxes, stop wasteful spending, and start creating jobs?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we've got the lowest business. Mr. Speaker, we've got the lowest business taxes, Mr. Speaker. You know what? I've been in this House now for going over 15 years, Mr. Speaker, and I remember one of the first things they did in the campaign, Mr. Speaker. One of the first things.
Go ahead.
One of the first things they did in a campaign, Mr. Speaker, and that they trotted in Metro here, they wouldn't dare bring it to Cape Breton, was close Cisco open hospital beds. Well, half of that was right, Mr. Speaker. They forsaken the steelworkers of Cape Breton, but didn't open any beds, Mr. Speaker. That's the type of group you're dealing with those guys.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's an old saying, there's a story behind every number. For Nova Scotians waiting for orthopedic surgeries, there are unfortunately thousands of stories, so I will outline just one as I have her permission to do so. Carol Touton has been waiting for her orthopedic surgery for 18 months. In actual fact, due to a mix-up in the referral process, it's been 30 months. Despite placing herself on the cancellation list, her surgeon told her, expect to wait another 3 to 6 months. When you exclude the referral process, that's a wait of 2 years. When you incorporate the mix-up with the referral, Carol's wait time is almost 3 years. How is it acceptable that some 30 months later, Carol is still waiting for her orthopedic surgery? My question is to the Minister of Health.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Access to the appropriate healthcare services is a priority for us. When we came into government, there was a mess within the finances of the province, but somewhat of a mess within the healthcare system. And I say that because the healthcare system wasn't sustainable. The money that we've seen, the growth in healthcare spending over the last number of years, leading into us coming into government, Mr. Speaker, was increasing exponentially. We had some of the highest increases in the country, but yet we continue to see wait times grow. So we've taken the approach that we tried to change models of care. We know that orthopedic surgeons have some of the longer wait lists, have some of the longest wait lists within the surgery services here in the province, Mr. Speaker. I'm unaware of the mix-up in the referrals. That is definitely an unfortunate situation. I'm not too familiar with the exact case that the member opposite has brought forward, but I'm more than happy to take any information from the member to see what we can do to see if we can assist in ensuring that that doesn't happen again, for one, but that individual can get the service they need, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Carol has worked with massage therapists, chiropractors, physiotherapists, and finally, 4 months ago, broke down and resorted to pain medication. Carol is doing what she can. Her healthcare system, however, is letting her down. Mr. Speaker, I found an interesting quote the other day that couldn't be more appropriate. In 2008, response to the opening of Scotia surgery, current Premier, while leader of the official opposition, stated, and I quote, "I know our public system, given adequate resources and effective direction, can improve wait times from within," and I will table that quote. Scotia surgery, while it can't help Carol, is still providing service. However, wait times for orthopedic surgeries in our province continue to produce failing grades. Could the minister please tell us whether it is inadequate resources or ineffective direction that is causing wait times for orthopedic surgeries to continue to grow?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we have addressed wait times, and we have seen wait times reduce in the province. Not all of them. I would agree there's a lot of work that needs to be done around the wait times of orthopedic surgeons. We have really high rates, success rates in addressing wait times for those more urgent and serious cases, like cardiac surgery, for example, Mr. Speaker. In Nova Scotia, Nova Scotians get those surgeries when they need them, as quickly as they need them, Mr. Speaker. We know that orthopedic surgery waits have been less of a priority compared to cardiac surgery. So that's why we recently invested in another additional $2 million to do what we would call an orthopedic blitz, where we tried to tackle anybody over a year wait to try to reduce that list, or that wait list, Mr. Speaker. As we move forward, as the hard work that we've done to get back to balance will allow myself as Minister of Health to look at additional funding towards orthopedic surgery so that we continue to drop those wait lists, Mr. Speaker. We have a number of professionals out into the district health authorities who are working in prehab clinics, for example. We had created one in Pictou, Cape Breton, and the Valley to help reduce the wait times, to help support people on the orthopedic surgery wait times, Mr. Speaker. And we want to work extremely hard to see if we can reduce those numbers into the future. That's why it was so important to get back to balance this year, Mr. Speaker. As we move forward, I hope, and it's my hope, that we can have more funds to address the orthopedic waits that we see in the province.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Energy. On April 18th, Moody's Investor Services assigned a AAA-backed issuing rating for the Muskrat Fall, to Emera for the Muskrat Falls project. The reason for this high-grade rating, Mr. Speaker, is because they said there is no risk to the company in the project. And those companies, of course, being Nova Scotia Power, Emera, and Nalcor. And I will table the Moody's rating. Mr. Speaker, and there's no risk to the companies because, of course, all the risk is going to be borne by Nova Scotia ratepayers on the Maritime Link project. Mr. Speaker, why does the minister feel that eliminating the risk for a very profitable private company such as Emera is a good idea, and shifting it to ratepayers is also a good idea?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, Emera has been around since the 1990s, and as we know, it was the Liberal government of the day that created Emera, so perhaps in the member's research you could get the answer he's looking for there. But today the UARB has the role to determine what is best for the ratepayers of Nova Scotia, and that process is underway with the present hearings, and by this summer we'll have an answer on whether it is the right deal for ratepayers of this province.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's this government that has shifted the risk away from Emera and to Nova Scotia ratepayers. Not any other party, not any other government. Mr. Speaker, there were other options, of course. This project could have moved ahead under a different type of deal where Emera would have taken the risk and any strategic benefits of the undersea connection could still be realized, as found by Synapse, the board's own consultant, and I'll table that. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, Credit Suisse also gave a high approval rating for the Maritime Link project because, again, Emera assumes no risk. In fact, Credit Suisse gave Emera stock an outperform rating, in part because, quote, electricity transmission-focused endeavours, in particular related to Nalcor projects, in our view are key drivers for the stock in the future. Key drivers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, why is the NDP so focused on increasing the share price of Emera rather than ensuring the true lowest cost energy alternative for ratepayers, which we now know is a made in Nova Scotia solution?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, made in Nova Scotia, that's what COMFIT is all about, and the COMFIT is the community feed-in tariff that's been very popular in this province, and many municipalities and non-profit groups are looking at that. And green energy is what this government is committed to. Muskrat Falls is certainly an important part of that. But again, the UARB has the role and responsibility to look at all the evidence, including the interveners, including the experts that have testified. It'll be cross-examined. It'll be the evidence will be fully tested, and in the end, the decision will be made by the UARB to determine whether it is the best possible transaction for ratepayers of this province.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Mr. Speaker, this government is so proud of the COMFIT projects that their own study, the Dalton study, as found by the Synapse report that I just tabled, forgot to include their impact when it looked at the Maritime Link project. That's how important they were to this government. Mr. Speaker, this government is so focused on protecting Emera that last year it signed an agreement with the company to not negatively impact it through regulatory charges. And I'll table the Premier's press release. I'm sure most businesses wish the province would have signed such a deal with them, instead of burdening them with $1,400 more higher user fees, a reduced threshold for the small business tax, and ever-increasing power rates. But as always, the NDP sides with Emera and not small business owners. Mr. Speaker, it's so bad that Credit Suisse in the report I tabled just calls the hearings regulatory noise. Mr. Speaker, why is the NDP so focused on increasing profits over one company over the well-being and success of every other small business in the province?
The Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been trying since this spring session has started and before to try to figure out what is the Liberal position on energy. What is it they're really trying to do? I do know, Mr. Speaker, they want to put the HST back on home energy. They want to eliminate efficiency in Nova Scotia. They're talking about deregulating the electricity market. That's a 30 to 50% increase. They want to cozy up to Hydro-Quebec. But, really, I'm trying to determine what is the real Liberal plan here. And I found on the 28th of March, the honourable member from Dartmouth East tabled a document. I guess it's maybe what their Liberal plan is on energy. They had this document. It's a one-pager. I guess it's actually about a two-thirds of a pager. They said the Muskrat Falls, they compared that to their alternate plan. Well, the alternate plan really is, the Liberal plan. It's untitled. This document is a lot of typing mistakes in it, but it tells me maybe what the Liberal plan is. But they're putting it forward as their experts, their expertise on energy. And it mentions there's a 0% risk to ratepayers. But I would say, Mr. Speaker, that there's really a 0% chance this is going to succeed. So that's what the Liberal energy plan is all about. So I'll table that, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last time the shelter component for income assistance recipients was increased, it was by the former Conservative government in 2006. That's 7 years, Mr. Speaker, and over the past 4 years under the NDP, we've seen no increase, although market rents have steadily climbed. Can the minister explain to the House why the NDP government continued the trend of no increase in shelter allowances for income assistance recipients?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for the question, because I know that he brings this question up the last several years. And so the explanation is still the same, is that we realize that we're going through tough economic times, and we're the first government that have created so many different initiatives that give people multiple opportunities to increase their income. And we have done that through many different means in terms of providing the poverty reduction tax credit, the affordable tax credit. We've increased the child tax benefit. We've also increased the IA rate by $17 a month this time, and that's a total of $47 increase. So there's many items that we have provided for people of Nova Scotia to tap into those particular programs so that they will actually, and have seen actually, an increase in their income levels. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, landlords in HRM are awaiting a decision from the Utility and Review Board that will see a potential large increase in their water costs this coming July. With rising energy costs, including electricity, landlords are starting to feel the squeeze. And ultimately, Mr. Speaker, it will be felt by tenants. Jeremy Jackson, President of the Investment Property Owners Association of Nova Scotia, was recently quoted in the Chronicle Herald stating, and I quote, "The challenge that we have is if you think about apartments, oftentimes it's the students, it's the seniors, it's working class, the folks that obviously aren't in high income brackets. They're the ones that are going to take the biggest hit," and I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, although the increase in personal allowance in this budget will be seen as beneficial, it is simply in one hand and taken right out by the other when we're looking at potential increases in rent. When will the minister and her government understand that with no shelter increase for income assistance recipients, they will continue to live unhealthy lives and be at risk for potential homelessness?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member opposite knows, we've had many discussions about the challenges of increasing the shelter rate, because in turn what often happens, and history has shown, that the landlords in turn increase the shelter rate. So then it goes exactly in one hand and out of the other hand. So we're trying to prevent that by taking a holistic approach where individuals and families and seniors are actually being boosted up in their income from all these variety of programs that I have talked about. And in fact, with seniors, we have been very focused on helping seniors in terms of those that receive the GIS no longer paying income tax, increasing that amount, along with the land tax rebate, which we've increased twice from a total of $400 right up to $800 since this government's been in as a maximum. There's been many different programs, as I said, and I think what's important to note that by helping families and individuals increase their overall income is a much better solution than providing an increase in shelter rates that one day they'll have in their left hand and the next day they're passing it along to the landlord in their right hand. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, rising electricity costs, rising food costs, and increasing rental rates, along with numerous policy changes and adjustments within the Department of Community Services, has made it more difficult for income assistance recipients to recover from addiction, live day-to-day with mental health issues, and of course, more importantly, Mr. Speaker, move towards becoming employable. Mr. Speaker, with all these challenges that low-income Nova Scotians have faced over the past 4 years, how can they believe that the NDP government has moved forward with the poverty reduction strategy in a positive way?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's so much I could talk about with regards to this, and those are such things as I previously mentioned. But if you take the original poverty reduction strategy that was developed in 2009 and do a comparison, you will see that this government has absolutely exceeded any of the objectives and goals that were in that strategy. We've also are developing the first housing strategy in this province that will address some of those issues issues that are being brought forth. We do know that times are tough and there are increases in food prices, and we understand the issues around electricity. That's why we've taken the HST off of home heating that the other two parties opposite would put back on if they were in government. We developed the first mental health strategy. We're entirely changing the internal workings of community services. We're redesigning the income assistance program, and I can go on. And those on the opposite side never, ever looked at even one strategy to develop, and we have multiple strategies, and there's action behind those strategies. And just ask those people that have had an increase in their income level, like a working couple, young couple with 2 children, for example, have now over $2,400 in their pocket annually that would have never occurred with those parties on the opposite side.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, as everyone knows, the 2013-14 budget is based on extremely optimistic revenue projections for the province. HST revenue, which is reliant on retail sales and transactions, is estimated to grow by an additional $78.9 million, or almost 5%. But just this week, we've received retail sales figures from Stats Canada that show a far more somber reality. Nova Scotia had negative retail sales growth in all measures. On a month-over-month, year-to-date, and on a year-over-year basis, retail sales decreased 0.6%, 2.2%, and 1.6%, all three of them decreasing. Mr. Speaker, given these disappointing retail sales results, how can the minister stand and support the inflated HST revenue figures that were included in the budget this year?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've said here before, Mr. Speaker, the revenue forecast for this year's budget passed last night. Received for the first time in a decade the unqualified opinion of the Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, we're prepared with the consultation process of all of the senior economists in the major financial institutions in the country and other important organizations such as the Conference Board of Canada and APEC. Mr. Speaker, those forecasts, those assumptions were supported as being reasonable assumptions given the progress this government has made and the fact that we are about to turn the corner on 20 years of the worst economic performance under previous governments, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, there's no turning the corner. There's burying their heads in the sand is what's happening. Mr. Speaker, the revenue projected from HST will be dependent on people working and having disposable income to buy cars, electronics, and everything else. While retail sales are down, next year's projection for employment are also down. It's been projected that there will be 1,100 fewer jobs in Nova Scotia next year, and the budget assumption documents which we were given projects an unemployment rate of 9.2% in 2013 and 14, which is actually higher, in other words, worse than it is today. So with higher unemployment projected for the coming year, the likelihood of any significant increase in HST revenue is very unlikely. Mr. Speaker, given that the budget assumptions document itself does not support the HST revenue estimate in the budget, would the minister commit to tabling in the House the assumptions that were cherry-picked to create this unrealistic revenue projection?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the only thing that we see in this House that is cherry-picked is the very select, highly distorted, often factually incorrect information that comes from that party over there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, You know, last month, Nova Scotia was the only province in the country that added full-time jobs in the economy following a prior month when we had also seen a reversal in the job numbers. Mr. Speaker, we have some fantastic opportunities on the horizon, and the member may have seen the senior economist from APEC speaking at a KPMG conference not so long ago, where she talked about how Nova Scotia has very positive opportunities in front of us that indeed will mean economic growth and job potential in this province. Mr. Speaker, we don't hear the members from the opposition talk about those things. All we hear from the opposition is negativity, is cynicism, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, we are the party that will bring prosperity to this province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's own assumptions document, which was passed out to every member of the House here, along with the budget information, shows indicators like high unemployment, flat population growth, more part-time work, and more. Those all negative figures. None of these would support a marked increase in HST revenue or in personal income tax revenue. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business Surveys, if we can go to them as well, they regularly survey their members, and their recent findings continue to show a lack of optimism and confidence among business owners. They don't see any significant growth in their staff numbers because they feel unsure about the future. So here again is another indicator, one that shows business confidence, and it doesn't support a projection that would say we're going to get more people working and more personal income tax and more HST. So, Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell the House how she can reconcile the inflated revenue projections with the reality of a cautious and uncertain business climate in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would think that the honourable member would be aware that while retail sales are very important and, yes, in fact, have a relationship, a bearing on HST revenue, they're certainly not the only driver of HST revenue. And Mr. Speaker, one of the most significant drivers of HST revenue, in fact, is construction, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, in the area of construction, once again, Nova Scotia is in very strong position. All you have to do is look around the HRM and you see the construction that is going on, Mr. Speaker. And
30 builder cranes, the most in our history.
And Mr. Speaker, well, the members opposite, they seem to think that it's not good to have construction in the HRM. Well, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you that construction in the HRM and the generation of revenue in this area, the generation of revenue in this area benefits the entire province. It means not only can we balance our budget, it means we can reinvest in things that the Liberal Party cut when they were in government, like the children's dental program, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Public Accounts Committee met on December 5th, 2012, and I heard from witnesses from the Department of Education. Committee members had questions that the witnesses were unable to answer, and those questions were sent in correspondence from the Public Accounts Committee to the Department of Education on December the 19th, and I will table that correspondence. On January 21st, the Deputy Minister acknowledged receipt of the letter and said a response would be, and I quote, forthcoming shortly, and I will table her response. As of March the 12th, the committee had still not received a response, and so a second letter was sent, and I will table that. On April 4th, Mr. Speaker, a third letter was sent to the department, and I will table that. It is now April the 24th, and still no response from the department. We heard concerns yesterday, Mr. Speaker, from all members of the opposition and from the member from Halifax Atlantic that this government is preventing this House from doing its work, and this includes the work of the legislative committees. So my question to the minister is this. Is the failure to respond to the request from the All-Party Committee of Public Accounts due to the fact that the minister and her department do not know the answers, or are they withholding information and impeding the work of this House?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will make sure that I will speak to the Deputy Minister to exactly see the train of this. This is the first I'm hearing of this situation, and you know we will make sure that the information will be forthcoming. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that first correspondence went in December. It is now 4 months. I would expect that the minister might know what's going on in her department. Mr. Speaker, these questions were put to the Public Accounts Committee on behalf of parents and teachers and students. And we know this government has not identified education as a priority. They continue to cut funding from schools for the last 3 years. The minister does not know how many students have special needs. The minister denies that there are nearly 2,000 kids waiting for a wait list for critical assessments. And we know that the department should be able to answer every one of the committee's questions. I would hope that the minister respects the legislative committee structure. Either that, or why will she not give the answers? So, my question to the minister, why has there been no response to the committee's requests that were submitted 4 months ago?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I said in my first answer, that I definitely will be reacting to this and making sure that the information is forthcoming. I also want to make it very, very clear that this government has a priority as for our education system. We have brought in a plan with Kids and Learning First. We are making sure that our youngest children in our province are supporting with literacy, with succeeding in reading. We're making sure that our children are getting the appropriate math with our math program that's going to be moving forward. This is a government that has moved forward, and Mr. Speaker, we are making sure that we have education as a priority, and as I said, I will look into this situation and I will be back to the honourable member as soon as I can.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Port Hawkesbury paper is in an industry that's highly stressed. Paper products are not used as much as they once were, and although we do hear good reports about the mill, that it's achieving success with sales orders, we do know that the industry is stressed. And now that the mill is up and running, wood suppliers are one of the costs for the mill. And they are now under stress as well because they're called upon to provide wood to the mill at a very competitive price so the mill can sell paper at a competitive price. So my question to the minister, will the minister meet with these suppliers and hear their recommendations and work with them to ensure that they have a future to keep supplying the mill?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly I thank the opportunity for the member to, I guess, maybe continue our dialogue that we had in the estimate. So it sounds very similar to what we had previously discussed. But as we know, when there was challenges there in that mill, our Premier stepped up and immediately met with the workers and their families and the businesses in the area, and the Forestry Infrastructure Fund was put in place, as well as the Hot Idle Initiative, and kept that mill alive and kept the opportunity to create good jobs, 1,400 good jobs in the community. And some of those are in the woods, in the contracting, and woods operators and truckers and silviculture contractors and so on. So we certainly had a full commitment to Port Hawkesbury, to Cape Breton and eastern Nova Scotia, and we continue to do that. And I would be pleased at any time to meet with the forestry workers or their representatives to see in what way we can continue the dialogue.
The honourable member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the minister for his gracious offer. Mr. Speaker, I'm thinking of a couple of things here. Silviculture rates for wood contractors have not changed for the past 15 years. Now, before the members opposite say, well, the previous government should have done something about that, we are where we are. And this represents, I want to say that silviculture represents a needed revenue stream for some of these wood suppliers. They don't just cut wood, they also go out into the forests and make sure that the forests rejuvenate. So will the minister review these rates and recognize that it costs more to do silviculture work today than it did 15 years ago?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we know the value of the forest industry to this province. Certainly, and as it indicated in the earlier response, we kept the forest industry alive through the troubling period they had, and now with the new operator, things are once again on much more stable ground. The silviculture rates, I understand, are under review. We're looking at that, and we will continue to work with the stakeholders in the industry. And of course, prices depend on supply and demand. You know, the market conditions, certainly with the two large pulp mills in eastern and central region of the province, there is some competition, and that's a good thing for the private woodlot owner.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, another issue that's been raised is the amount of wood that's being purchased from New Brunswick. And of course, when wood is purchased out of province, we don't have the same silviculture fees going back into our province. So that's affecting these suppliers as well. But I do know that part of the agreement with Port Hawkesbury Paper is that they are to buy 200,000 tons of pulpwood from private Nova Scotia suppliers each year. Can the minister assure us all that those targets are look like they're going to be hit this year in terms of the amount of woods purchased from Nova Scotia suppliers? And could he provide that information by tabling it here in the legislature? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And initially, when the mill started up last September, there was a contract to provide 200,000 tons from private woodlot owners, and there were some challenges in meeting that in the first 3 months. But so there's a small amount of wood, I understand, that was purchased from New Brunswick. But since that time, there's been no wood purchased from out of province. And so 200,000 tons was the quota out of the 600,000 tons, so a third was the commitment to private woodlot owners. My understanding now that arrangements have been made with various sawmillers and private woodlot cooperatives and owners, and actually it's almost half. It's actually 48% of the wood is now being purchased from private woodlot owners in eastern Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the minister responsible for immigration. Mr. Speaker, it's been said that the community identified stream provides rural communities with their best opportunity to get the economic benefits of immigration. In 2011, the number of nominee certificates under that community identified stream was 146, and that means 146 families that went to rural parts of the province. The success of the stream is solely attributable to the former RDAs. Their hard work ensured the benefits of immigration were spread across the province and not centralized just in the urban core. My question to the minister, now that the province is transitioning away from RDAs, could the minister please tell us who is responsible for ensuring the success of the community identified stream?
The Honourable Minister responsible for immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, at the end of the day, it's the Office of Immigration, and to a point, I like the encouragement from across the way. It's the federal government. But, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with RENs when they develop and work with them as champions for rural Nova Scotia, especially as it relates to immigration issues, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not very happy with that answer because there's a gap in our system for immigration to rural areas. I hope the minister will look into this. Mr. Speaker, I hope the minister will be looking into this. The RDAs provided not only the identification of community people that could come to immigrate to their areas. They also provided the newcomer navigators and support that help people stay in those areas. So it was a very important part of immigration to rural Nova Scotia. The provincial nominee stream and the work done in communities throughout the province helps all rural communities. So while the rural enterprise networks, which are supposed to replace RDAs, are going to have a new mandate and focus, it's important that we don't lose the focus on immigration in rural areas. That's important. My final question to the minister is, will regional enterprise networks be mandated to identify immigrants under the community identified stream, or will this government just hope for the best when it comes to the future success of attracting immigrants to rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister responsible for immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't, again, the theme of today is what part of yes don't you understand, Mr. Speaker? We've been working for this. You know, that we will work with the RDAs, and I know the member from Glace Bay wants me to talk for a minute and a half, but no, because it wouldn't be fair, because I'm sure that the member has another supplementary, Mr. Speaker. But the thing is, we are working with these groups, and it is community focused. We understand that, and we were working with these groups. It's not as they would portray it. It is a fact, Mr. Speaker, that we're working with all individuals in all communities to grow our immigration.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, however you felt about the provision of regional development services for economic development, it's important that the government recognize immigration was part of the service. That's what's important, and that's what's being missed. Mr. Speaker, it's very important that the government replace that service on the ground in rural Nova Scotia. That's the purpose of my question today, on the ground. Mr. Speaker, the minister has not provided an answer about who's going to provide the service in the absence of the RDA. So I don't mind asking him with 10 seconds to go. Maybe he can provide me a written answer or an answer to the House. It's important to many members in this House who's going to be the point of contact for community-identified immigrants in rural Nova Scotia.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers have expired. I will now recognize the House Leader for the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 34?
Bill number 34. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it gives me pleasure to rise on Bill number 34, the Ratepayers Protection Act. And astute watchers of the legislature will note that this bill is slightly different than the last version because, of course, after a year of arguing against it, the NDP government actually finally adopted one of the parts of this bill, which was removing the bonuses from executive salaries, which was included in the original version of this bill. And of course, we all remember the government spent over a year saying wasn't necessary and was a bad idea, and then finally adopted that Liberal idea. In fact, it's one after another that they're adopting some of them. For example, in the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, you will remember that the government started talking about a competitive electricity market after, again, years of, well, actually, I shouldn't say years of saying it was a bad idea, Mr. Speaker. There were a few years of saying it was a bad idea, and before that, years of the now Deputy Premier saying what a great idea that would be. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, they're having trouble deciding how they feel about that issue, I guess. You know, Mr. Speaker, this includes the remaining tenets of that original bill and forms just a part of some of the things that we believe need to be done in the electricity market in Nova Scotia. And for example, you know, the government made a halfway step in their bill and said, well, you know, they argued, and the Premier stood up time after time after time and told us about why audits were a bad idea of Nova Scotia Power and how they were already done. And then, of course, they introduced a bill that included discretionary and optional audits. But we have left that in this bill because we believe they should be mandatory. We do not believe that that should be a discretionary issue. And we believe that they should focus on the issue of value for money. We know know, Mr. Speaker, from some of the audits which are done on fuel, and there are audits that are done now, but of course those are primarily around fuel, that there have been a number of cases found, especially in gas hedging and other parts of that market in terms of coal supply and so forth, where Nova Scotia Power has incorrectly made assumptions. In fact, a FAM update that came, a fuel adjustment mechanism update that came out just 2 days ago showed, and I apologize if I get the number not exactly right, but I believe that Nova Scotia Power underestimated their fuel costs for the year so far by $45 million. Now, keep in mind, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker now, keep in mind, Madam Speaker, that is $45 million out on the fuel adjustment mechanism, which automatically causes rates to go up, something which is excluded from the third party's bill or argument that they're going to freeze rates. In fact, the fuel adjustment mechanism, which continues to be the single largest contributor to rates, means that rates would continue to go up. And at the moment, because of the deal that was signed last year, we are building an ever-increasing value in the deferred costs, which ratepayers will get whacked with in just a few years' time when the current stabilization agreement runs out. Madam Speaker, this bill would also require that Nova Scotia Power publicly post their estimated and then actual costs on their website in an audited fashion on a regular basis. So why is this important? Well, Madam Speaker, we need to know what the true costs are of Nova Scotia Power, what they're going into these hearings with. And what happens now is that if they overestimate some of the costs, for example, if they go in and they overestimate the cost of salaries or fuel for the trucks, well, they still get to retain that in the rates. And we don't, the only thing they don't get to retain it on that is an actual cost is fuel. And so it allows them to make more money. And finally, one of the other parts of this bill, I know I only have a few seconds left, Madam Speaker, is the fact that any rate settlement negotiations would be held in public and not in secret, that it would not be a series of secret meetings resulting in a rate hike without the public being able to watch these. And I just can't imagine that the government would want to continue to support the idea that Nova Scotia Power holds these automatically in secret. And in fact, if they weren't able to reach something in a public fashion, then the costs of the hearings would be borne by Nova Scotia Power and not by ratepayers. And at the moment, ratepayers are stuck with tens of millions of dollars in their rates as a result of the cost of hearings. So thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Glad to talk Liberal Opposition Day to talk about this bill and the Liberal Party plan for energy, or whatever. I guess it might be a plan, but a few points that they write on a website somewheres. You know, Madam Speaker, last week I rose in my place to talk about this very issue, and one of the things I mentioned was around the Liberal Party plan for energy. And I mentioned a screen capture of the Liberal Party website, and I've tabled this before, this one document, and it was in February 1st, 2013, Madam Speaker, that has 4 points of the Liberal Party plan. It was 4 points, which, you know, quite blatantly, Madam Speaker, talks about importing power and talking about Hydro-Quebec and cozying up to Hydro-Quebec. But you know, Madam Speaker, what's interesting is a week after our party put out an information piece onto the televisions, I noticed just a week later, Madam Speaker, the Liberal Party changed their energy policy. Oh, really? They changed their energy policy, Madam Speaker. They added some things, Madam Speaker, and one of the things they added was about not necessarily, they said explore possibilities about renewable energy in Nova Scotia and a main Atlantic Canada solution. Interesting, Madam Speaker, because the Liberal Party, we never know where they stand on things, Madam Speaker, because one day they say one thing and the next day they say another. So I want to take a little history lesson back, and one of the things we do know about the history books, Madam Speaker, and I've said this before, is that history, we can predict the future by looking in the past. And one of the things we do know, Madam Speaker, is in 1996, the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker, they were the creators of what we know now as the HST. They are the creators of the HST, Madam Speaker. And you know what they did? They applied the HST to electricity costs in this province, Madam Speaker. In 1999, Madam Speaker, the Liberal Party and the leader of the Liberal Party they brought in the HST, Madam Speaker, in 1998. 2003, Madam Speaker, they campaigned against an NDP plan to take the HST off life essentials, just like home heating. In 2005, Madam Speaker, the Liberal Party leader at the time, Danny Graham, said, and he brought forward a resolution that I'll table here, Madam Speaker, tables a resolution condemning the NDP plan to remove the HST from home energy. That was in 2005, Madam Speaker. In 2006, the Liberal Party leader of the day, Francis McKenzie, I know they don't ever talk about him very much, but Francis McKenzie, the leader of the Liberal Party there, talked about how it would not. In fact, it says the Liberal Party leader at the time said the province needs to encourage and Nova Scotians need to conserve fuel and not subsidize energy costs by taking the HST off of home electricity, and I will table that, Madam Speaker. The other thing, Madam Speaker, is that in 2008, the Liberal Party leader the Liberal Party leader of the day today voted in favor of a budget that the Conservatives brought in that puts HST back on home energy, Madam Speaker. And during the 2009 election campaign, Madam Speaker, the Liberal Party leader said that, and I quote, it was bad public policy to put to take the HST off home electricity. And you know, Madam Speaker, that's exactly what the Liberal Party believes today when it comes to our energy security. Our government has a plan for lower power rates for Nova Scotians, stable power rates, so that we can get off of fossil fuels. And I wish, you know, Madam Speaker, the member from Yarmouth would actually stand up for the people of Yarmouth and talk about a plan to get off renewables. The Liberal Party have no plan for the future. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Now recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and glad to have I guess what's only a couple of minutes to speak today to Bill number 34, and I don't have any websites printed off or anything like that to speak to or to talk about, I guess, in this point or that point. I guess what I do want to say is we're supposed to be talking about ratepayer fairness. I thought that was the topic of the bill. I probably should look up the number and the exact name of it, but I know it's along those lines somewhere, and I thought we were going to talk about that. But instead, we're going to banter back and forth about who's got the greatest ideas. So far, we haven't seen too many of those. That hasn't worked. But what the idea should be... Might save me, John. Thanks, John. Anyway, Madam Speaker, unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we should touch on a few things that the ratepayer, the taxpayer, they're one and the same. I've argued that many times. Everybody seems to have an idea or two or three as to what might be the best plan of attack, and, you know, we're moving toward an election, I guess, somewhere, and we'll all have a plan to put forward and to talk about and try to take to the public and let them decide what's best. What's been mostly, though, by government touted is the Muskrat Falls package. We've talked about that a lot in this place. We haven't really seen much change. Certainly the plan is still moving forward. It will be under review. We hope that the review is significant and shows what it will cost. We don't know. We've talked about that many times. We don't have a true cost. I think ratepayers want to know, given the title of this bill is Ratepayer Fairness, they want to be treated fairly. They want to know what the rates will be. And I know what's not fair, and they'll tell you firsthand, is that every year they're going up 3% and 4% and more. And, you know, 30% now over the last few years has been something that they have struggled with. And not only individuals. Our business community that I spoke of many times have struggled to stay, and some we forced away. But, you know, the everyday people that are trying to work and pay the bills, and I'm not talking about two people, both working in the family, making a decent job, you know, decent money, working hard, are still struggling. I see these people. I know as members we all see these people, and I've said this many times as well, that we have to figure out what is fair for ratepayers. At some point, it has to stop. We have to say enough is enough. Now, we have said, we've put out there publicly that we will freeze the rates. And what that means is we will freeze the rates. We've done the calculations, we've done the math, and we're confident we can do that. That's not a political statement, that's a fact. We've done that. We're willing to say we'll do that. And then we'll look at what are the best plans moving forward for the ratepayers in this province. We think that there's a better way of showing how that can be done. Looking at the audits if you want to look at audits, or looking at the ideas going forward. Why does it cost this much or that much? Are these really the facts as to what people think? They don't like paying the high rates on power. Every January, here we are again, coming up January 14, we're going to have another 3%. And they look at the URB, it's a rubber stamp, basically. Now, we would never say anything to discredit the URB. It's a process in place today, but it needs to be changed. We know that there's changes that must happen. If we're going to change the way that energy is created in the province, if we're going to move to renewables, if we're going to move off of this and into that, and we're going to talk about Muskrat Falls and whether we're going to build a cable and spend billions of dollars and then not own it at the end of the day, I should point out, we should talk about if that's fair to ratepayers. That's what this bill is supposed to be. There's nothing really in this bill that says this is really the end-all, be-all and fair to ratepayers. I think that we have a great opportunity moving forward to do something about the cost of energy if we really want to. And that's not buying from one or buying from this one or buying from this. Why not look at buying from anywhere? What we should be buying from and looking for is the opportunity to get the best rates from whomever. And we've said that. We're interested in the regional idea. I don't care where we get it. And I can tell you right now, talking to ratepayers, Madam Speaker, they don't care where they get it either, as long as they're getting the rate that they can afford. That is what is important. And that, Madam Speaker, I know I'm running short on time, that is what's fair to ratepayers. And we in this House have the opportunity to do that and to build those rules and legislation and force that kind of moving forward, if you want to call it that. Thank you. Time flies by rather quickly in here, unfortunately. Madam Speaker, we're just getting warmed up on this, unfortunately. But we need to, we have the ability in here to create that, to create a world where you can have rules made in this House, whether it's with the URB or without the URB, or how those decisions will be made. But the opportunity to go out and seek out reasonable energy rates that people can afford, as I've said. We're not doing that. We've got a one-track mind right now when it comes to Newfoundland. Now, that may turn out, as I've said before, to be a great deal. But since nobody wants to share the cost, and surely they must know, but there's a guesstimate, I guess they're kicking around by way of some formula, and we haven't even got a shovel in the ground yet, and we're thinking we know what the overall cost is. We don't. That's not fair to ratepayers either. But in moving forward, Madam Speaker, I know my time is just pretty much up. I want to say if we want to talk about fairness to ratepayers, we should really put our money where our mouths are and start doing the right thing and developing policy around that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now recognize the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to call Bill number 1, the Accountability and Economic Development Assistance Act.
Now call Bill number 1. Recognize the Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to get up and speak to this Liberal bill, which is our hope that will bring some accountability to the current economic development strategies of this government. We've seen over the course of the last number of years, the NDP cut larger and larger checks to some of the biggest corporations in North America without any job guarantees tied to those checks. And without any guarantees to Nova Scotians that there's going to be a return on those large investments. Madam Speaker, I think there's been over $700,000 or approximately $700 million, sorry, not thousand, that's million, that's been given to 7 companies. That's $700 million that's gone to 7 companies only, Madam Speaker. And we have not seen a return on those large sums of so-called investments that have gone to these companies. Right. And we don't know what the direct benefits are to Nova Scotians, if any, or if the companies are providing what they said they were going to be providing when they signed the contracts to get these big checks. In 6 of those companies, they received, I think, approximately $590 million. It was the case that collectively they actually laid off 1,300 people, Madam Speaker. And I mean, these are things that I don't think we can allow to happen. We saw the mismanagement with the Bowater issue when this government cut that company a check without any guarantees to Nova Scotians. When this caucus asked questions about those guarantees and tried to ensure that the investment was going to be put to good use, and that we were actually going to maintain those jobs here. The government said we're going to be the lowest in the polls we've ever been because we were being critical of that deal. A deal that was supposed to last for 5 years. 5 months later, that company took half of that, I think $50 million that was given to them and left. You know, and we have the same case with Daewoo. We were promised there would be 500 jobs in Daewoo, and there was $60 million, I believe, that were given to Daewoo. And Nova Scotians were told there's going to be 500 jobs created. There's now 15 people working at that plant. And now these folks, Madam Speaker, say that it's inexperience speaking right now. Yeah. You know, if I was the government, if I was the member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour, I would be very concerned about the fact that his government has cut these large sums of checks while cutting back from education, while cutting back from health care, while cutting you know, almost $100 million out of universities, cutting these big checks to these big companies who are laying people off. You know, this isn't an economic development strategy. It's the same problem, I think, that every party who has had the privilege of governing in this province have had. It's the same mistake, I think, that every party who has governed in this province have made. And that is based on the assumption that you can just buy jobs in the province of Nova Scotia without looking at the fundamentals that impact our economy, that impact our ability to compete for outside industry to come in, or that help foster you know, our province as a place of entrepreneurship and small business growth. And you know, this government has just done the same thing every other government's done, and there's been Liberal governments that have done this as well. And it's okay. I think it's important that we learn from those mistakes of all parties, and hopefully each party that becomes a government gets better at understanding what those challenges are and making better decisions as a result. What this bill aims to do, and I don't think that its goals would be in opposition to anything that the government has been saying or anything in their agenda, at least I hope not. This bill seeks to create transparency when it comes to these economic development checks that are given out, to ensure that there's job guarantees when checks are given, and to ensure that the companies are actually producing what they said they were going to do in order to get that money. So this bill accomplishes two main goals, Madam Speaker. One, a recipient of economic development assistance must provide upon request the details of the economic development assistance agreement signed with the province, the terms and conditions, and how the recipient is proceeding with regards to meeting any targets and timelines set out in the terms and conditions. The second thing, the government must publish this information on agreements and progress on a publicly accessible central website so that Nova Scotians have access to that information. So what this bill seeks to do is simply create measures of accountability and transparency around these big checks to ensure that Nova Scotians are aware of what's happening, and to ensure that companies who are receiving taxpayers' dollars are doing what they said they were going to do. And I don't think that there would be anything in this bill that would be in opposition to what this government has been saying. And we hope that they take this bill seriously. You know, the member for Sackville Hammonds Plains said he hoped that I would get up and speak on behalf of my constituents, which I'm happy to do. He's, I think, the third or fourth person this week to call me out and ask me to get on my feet. I guess that shows the people at home that I'm doing my job, Madam Speaker, and that I'm doing my best to keep this government accountable. And it'll never be a problem for me to get up on my feet and speak about any of these issues, and speak about them frankly, and hopefully coming from a place that that is you know, coming from a place where I understand these issues. So if you look at what this government has done for economic development, the numbers actually speak for themselves. Now, we have a government that stands up and says, we are, you know, first they promised Nova Scotians when they ran they were going to create 2,000 jobs a year, that they had a plan to do that. We have since seen job losses in the thousands since this government has taken office. We actually have an economy that's performing more poorly right now after 3 years of this NDP regime than it did in the recession. So the government's new narrative is that, oh, well, no, things are bad now, but because of all the great things that we're doing, we're now turning a corner to prosperity and success, and whatever else they believe is going to happen. But if you actually look at the government's own budget, the figures that are there would indicate that the corner we're turning is just bringing us backwards in terms of economic output and employment. Because according to the government's own budget projections for next year, we have a decreasing population, again, we have higher unemployment, and they still, say they're turning a corner to prosperity when even in their own even in their own projections, things are getting worse, Madam Speaker. And if you look at the numbers now, they're not much better than they were 3 years ago. In a lot of cases, they're worse. If you look at the unemployment rates, they're extremely high. We have Cape Breton, which almost has a 20% unemployment rate. That's completely unacceptable. You look at the North Shore, it's almost 13%.
Nobody cranes in the
Annapolis Valley is 11.5%, and in southwestern Nova Scotia, it's 13.2%. That's the second highest unemployment rate in the province. And the government's decisions around economic development have actually, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, worsened the economic position of the province, not improved it. You look at the decision that this government made around the Yarmouth Ferry to cut this province off from one of the largest tourism markets in the world that was established for 100 years. Even during the recession, there was approximately 80,000 people coming over or using that vessel for the few years during the recession. It's 80,000 people coming over, paying for rooms, buying food, buying souvenirs, and traveling throughout the province from Yarmouth. And after talking to businesses all across the province, all the way up to Bedeque, and back around towards Yarmouth, it was clear in speaking with those businesses that they felt abandoned by this government when they made that decision to cut the Yarmouth Ferry. And they felt that this government did not consult the tourism industry before they made that decision. And businesses have been hurting as a result of that. Pictou Lodge, who went into receivership, it's a very, long-standing, established, beautiful resort in beautiful Pictou County. Lost 700 room bookings a year, all the way in Pictou. And speaking with tourism operators in Bedeque, there was businesses there that lost 20 to 30% of their room bookings a year. And that's in one of the tourism hotspots of the province. They all related that back directly to the loss of the ferry because there was a referral network throughout the province bringing those tourists to the various destinations. I do digress a little bit. The ferry is an important issue to me and my constituents, Madam Speaker. But the numbers do not reflect that this government's economic strategy has been working. The only thing that this government has done is cut these big checks to big corporations and hope that in so doing, jobs would somehow appear. I've heard that this government boast about the support that they're giving small business. They're talking about now they've cut, I think, the small business tax by another ½ percentage point. That's a good move. Small businesses do need tax relief for 4 years in a row. And listen, I'll give credit when credit's due. We did not oppose those cuts to the small business tax. We supported them. We think it's we think we need more tax relief for our small business who are really tied up with red tape and some of the highest taxes in the province when it comes to income and other things. Power rates, we have the highest power rates in the country. So the costs to our small businesses are extremely high. But what this government didn't even tell the small business when the Minister of Finance presented this new policy to the Chamber is that she actually lowered the small business tax threshold so that small businesses who are succeeding and making money are now going to be paying higher taxes because they're in a higher tax threshold. So the small business tax cut is actually revenue neutral for the government and actually hurts a lot of small businesses who in some cases will be paying upwards of $10,000 more in taxes a year. And they're paying more in those taxes because of this government. That's right. So what we want to see is a government that will actually start looking at investing in the small business sector, providing the supports for small business sector, because it just isn't about money, and addressing the fundamental challenges that businesses face when it comes to power rates, high gas prices, and the fact that we have an overregulated jurisdiction here in Nova Scotia with some of the highest taxes in the country. That hasn't happened. What this government has done is say, well, we're going to try and buy jobs with big checks to 7 big companies, none of whom have brought jobs into this province yet. We have laid off, 6 of those companies laid off 1,300 people. And if this government keeps championing this move like it's somehow good, the people will decide their fate, I'm sure. This piece of legislation is simply to ensure that when government cuts these big checks, there's a system of accountability in place and transparency that allows the taxpayers who are putting money into these companies, allows them to see where the money's going, forces the businesses to have job guarantees before they get any money, and ensures that all the information is made public to the taxpayer. If the government isn't afraid of transparency and accountability, they should move forward with this bill, because it is a good move, and I think one that a lot of Nova Scotians would be happy with. I have heard countless concerns from Nova Scotians in my constituency and beyond about these corporate handouts. You know, Ed Broadbent, who was a great leader of the NDP, used to call companies who receive those checks corporate welfare bumps. You know, what a long way that the NDP has come since those days. What a long way the NDP has come since those days. Perhaps the member for Pictou East doesn't remember because he was a Liberal back then. But Ed Broadbent and other NDP leaders like Alexa McDonough always opposed these corporate handouts. And here we have an NDP government in place who's giving out more than any government before them. You know, it's unreal. And it's not resulting in any sort of increase to our GDP, increased jobs, and in fact, our unemployment rate is actually going up as a result of this. So I don't know why this government continues to push for these, Madam Speaker. If they want to be accountable and transparency to the people, I would advise the minister next time she speaks to the Chamber of Commerce that she provides all the information about her plans and policies when it comes to their taxes. And I'd like her to be honest with those folks. And I think that they should move forward with this piece of legislation so that Nova Scotians can once again have confidence in this government's ability to be accountable to them. Liberal government, Madam Speaker, will end corporate handouts, will focus on the fundamentals, and focus on supporting our small businesses. And with that, I'll take my seat. Thank you very much.
Now recognize the honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to stand in my place today and speak about Bill number 1, an act to ensure accountability and providing economic development assistance in Nova Scotia, submitted by the Liberals. Well, I hope I have time to table a number of things from the Liberal days, because there is absolutely no understanding over there about what real job creation is. There is no understanding that job creation is based on performance. Today, it's based on performance. It's based on 10 years of performance usually. I will have an opportunity, I hope, to table some of the lack of accountability issues that came forward in the Liberal days. One company got millions and millions and millions of dollars. Their performance was over 18 months, and then they went down the tube. That's the accountability record of the Liberals. And I am proud to say that I have been a member of the New Democratic Party since the 1980s, for the member from Yarmouth's information. Since the 1980s, when I got discouraged with the party of the members opposite. Madam Speaker, speaking on Bill number 1, job creation accountability. You know, there are two philosophies, two trains of thoughts that pervade both parties on the other side. And one train of thought is a party of doing nothingness. How would you like to be a member of a party of doing nothingness? Because there are some members that believe that you don't have to put any money into job creation. The jobs will just come. That's in a society when we are competing. We are competing with other provinces. We are competing with other states. Job creation is vital, vital, vital for the benefit of Nova Scotians. And then we have the other philosophy. The other philosophy, Madam Speaker, is one of any time there is a standing by a community, standing by the people, it's considered, Madam Speaker, to be corporate welfare. Corporate welfare, they're saying, when you stand with the people, when you create jobs and preserve jobs, we hear over there, corporate welfare. Well, I want to ask a question today because I'm very proud of the answer. And the question that I am going to ask is, last month, which was the most productive pulp mill in Canada? What was that pulp mill? That pulp mill was the one that we stood beside. That pulp mill, Madam Speaker, was Port Hawkesbury Paper, PHP. We actually, Madam Speaker, saved 1,400 jobs. And every time we use that figure, it's always poo-pooed in this House. Madam Speaker, we are told repeatedly that it's only a few hundred jobs. Well, we know in my constituency there were 27 companies that were hurt when NewPage went down the tube. Now, I want to ask where the leaders were of all three parties when NewPage went down the tube. Because I was on my way into the legislature for a meeting. I came in for a meeting the very next day after the NewPage announcement, and I got a telephone call saying, Clary, turn your car around and head to Port Hawkesbury because the Premier's going to be there and he wants some members with him. Ask Billy Joe McLean, my friend Billy Joe McLean. Ask him about the Premier's involvement. I turned my car around and I went to Port Hawkesbury because the Premier was there the next morning, the very next morning. So where were the other leaders? Where was the leader? Where was the leader? Yeah, I made several trips down there and the Premier was there and some local members. I would like for the member for Inverness, and I would like for the member for Richmond to stand in their places and talk about the Strait area and what was done by this government. You know, because of the lack of experience by the members opposite and the leaders opposite, there was no understanding how saving the former NewPage mill would actually save hundreds of small businesses throughout the Strait. On top of that, the Liberals didn't understand that the province will gain its entire loan back and make $150 million in new tax revenue over 12 years. So I ask again, what pulp mill was the most productive in Canada last month? You know, Madam Speaker, in one 24-hour day, we had two announcements. One was IBM and the other was projects. 960 jobs were created. And I was actually very embarrassed in this House when in the Speaker's gallery, company representatives were up there, and they were referred to as corporate welfare people. That is the message that was sent to them. Now, I just heard the member for Yarmouth talk about DSTN and the number of employees there. Totally off the mark, because there has been a lot of rehiring and callbacks and so on. And you know something? The Liberal caucus actually met in Pictou County. And I've heard this from the Liberals, several members, on a number of occasions, talk about seeing 7 cars in the parking lot. We drove by and we saw 7 cars in the parking lot. You know, they didn't even know where the parking lot was. A party that can't get the parking lot right, there's something wrong, okay? Because if you drive down the main road in Trenton, beside some old buildings, there are some cars parked. They didn't realize that you had to go in by Nova Scotia Power Inc., the generating station there, and that there are gates there and commissionaires and 50, 60, 70, sometimes 100 cars there in the parking lot. They couldn't even get the parking lot right. And furthermore, we are saying that we are going to experience some good things in Nova Scotia after going through a time that has been the worst since the Great Depression. So what we're looking at is a situation where we are turning a corner, and the members opposite don't understand this at all. I'm sure if they tried to turn an economic corner, they would all get lost. But the situation with DSTN is one that we have actually saved a lot of jobs by reopening that plant. And the leader of the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party actually criticized by saying that the company shouldn't be allowed to compete for business in the province, including shipbuilding work that might otherwise go to outside Nova Scotia. And actually, there is some changes being made in the plant so that they can do more, and that's why they're calling people back. So there was actually a stand taken against DSTN, and I find that very, very discouraging. You know, in the past few months, the leader of the Liberal Party has threatened to kill more than 10,000 jobs for families in Digby, Truro, Cape Breton, Pictou, Halifax, Dartmouth, Port Hawkesbury, and Shelburne, to name a few.
Order, please. Order. I just want to remind the member that the use of the terminology killing something in the House of Assembly has been ruled out of order and unparliamentary. I would ask him to retract it, perhaps rephrase his comments.
Very sorry, Madam Speaker. I will certainly withdraw that. But it was destroying the possibility of many hundreds of jobs. You know, they have repeatedly talked to us about the Irving situation. They have talked to us about funding an enterprise, and Jim Irving has said repeatedly that without the province's role, we would have not gotten the great ships projects. We, in fact, he said thank you. Yes, he did. He said thank you. And I remember that day when there were workers with tears in their eyes, and I remember one man saying to me, his two sons were working with him at the facility there, and he said, and I'm trying to remember the quote, but it was something like, "I believe my sons will have jobs here for the rest of their working lives." That was a proud day, a very proud day in Nova Scotia when we heard that. And I have to say as well that, you know, the Liberal Party has actually taken a stand against 400 good jobs on the South Shore, in Digby, and at the feed mill in Truro in relationship to the Cook Aquaculture project. Now, years ago, I used to be the administrator of aquaculture in the province, and I saw Charlotte County in New Brunswick being transformed from an area with relatively high unemployment to an area that had very good employment levels. And that was based on the investments that were, in fact, made there. So I remember the leader of the Liberal Party speaking against the 400 good jobs, as I stated, on the South Shore. And, you know, I know there's one word that I can't say, but I can say that many, many jobs would, in fact, have been terminated if either one of the other parties were, in fact, in power. So I know my time is getting close to running out, but we are, in fact, creating jobs. I'm sorry I don't have time to table a good number of headlines from back in the Liberal days. I have many, many of them here. I wonder, since I am referring to them, if I could, in fact, table all of these, because the headlines are very, very
Order,
disturbing.
please. I want to remind the member that the use of props as well is out of order. Thank you. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm not going to take issue with you at all, because that would not be right. I was only going to refer to them with the proper headlines and, of course, read them here, but my time is just about gone. But I just want to close by saying I'm glad that we are creating jobs. I'm glad that we are creating jobs and preserving jobs.
Order,
preserving jobs.
Now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's my pleasure to join in the debate here this afternoon on the Bill number 1 that's put forward by the Liberal Party on accountability, an act to ensure accountability in providing economic development assistance in Nova Scotia. Now, Madam Speaker, we all know that we need accountability in providing economic development here in the province. There's been thousands and millions of dollars spent since I've been here that seem to be spent unwisely, I guess is the best way to put it. I haven't seen the job numbers going down as far as unemployment rates since I've been here. Spending money wisely is what we have to do more of. Madam Speaker, I'm hearing of millions of dollars going to a shipyard contract, but I think it's great that the shipyard contract that we have here. And I think the good people of the Irving Shipyard deserve that contract because they're the people that work there. They're the people that are the experts. They're the people that are building ships here in the province of Nova Scotia. And since that money's been put in place, I haven't heard of one job that's been created there so far. I asked for those job numbers and I didn't get them, Madam Speaker. Businesses in Nova Scotia are struggling, small businesses. And you know, we hear about here in Halifax, all the cranes that are in the air and how great the Halifax is doing. It's 9% unemployment. And you know, Madam Speaker, that's great.
Order, please. Becoming difficult to hear. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
As I said, Madam Speaker, it's great to see the cranes here in Halifax. But I don't see any cranes, not even on the ground, let alone up in the air in Cape Breton. The cranes I see in Cape Breton, Madam Speaker, are on an endangered species list. Madam Speaker, businesses in my community are struggling. The high taxes are killing those businesses, Madam Speaker. And I heard here just a few minutes ago about the business tax rate has gone down. And you know what, Madam Speaker, that is true. And that's true probably for a certain percentage of the population. But the threshold for those businesses has gone up. When those thresholds go up, Madam Speaker, those businesses get to cut in their percentage rates. They pay a lot more taxes, a lot higher taxes. And if that was transparent like the bill here produces, we'd see that. Even the member from Guysborough earlier was talking about, oh, we lowered the tax rate, but he didn't know the threshold was raised. Well, he didn't say it if he did know it. So he bragged about all the thresholds that we took down, and he never bragged about the threshold going up. So our small businesses that may do well, marginally well, and get over that threshold are going to pay a higher tax rate. That does nothing for the business in my area. Businesses are struggling. They're paying the highest power rates. They're paying the highest transportation rates. And they're paying the highest taxes. Madam Speaker, businesses that rely on power are paying more. We're hearing about these businesses, the Muskrat Falls, the transatlantic cable that's going to come across is going to create all these jobs. And we asked the question, where are the jobs going to be? And not one was told about Nova Scotia. They're going to Newfoundland, Madam Speaker, and Newfoundland's going to benefit from it. Newfoundland got stung by Quebec, and now they're not going to be that slow, and they're not going to do the same thing and give us all those jobs. Madam Speaker, we need to put a bill in place that's going to help as many people as we possibly can. Create as many jobs as we possibly can. You know, this bill will create transparency, ensure that jobs are produced, but I haven't seen in the bill where it says anything if it doesn't get produced. The jobs that are being produced are so-called produced by this NDP government with all their handouts. We don't know if there's any jobs. We know there's 1,300 jobs lost since all that money's been invested. If this bill was in place, maybe we could find out where the jobs are, and we could look at patting them on the back if they were actually created. But they don't like the non-pat on the back when we bring it up that they haven't been created. We want to make sure that that money is being spent on what it's agreed to be spent on. But let's be clear, Madam Speaker, we need to create jobs. I'd rather see a bill come forward that would create jobs and add the transparency with it, because that's what we need in this province. On Cape Breton, we have an 18.6% unemployment rate, highest in the province. Madam Speaker, in some areas of Cape Breton, there's 30% unemployment. We haven't got a firm commitment in this budget to create jobs in Cape Breton. The North Shore is over 13%. Southwest Nova Scotia is over 13%. And Madam Speaker, Halifax is doing well. And we all think that's a good thing, because to have a vibrant province, we have to have a vibrant capital city. But if we don't spread that growth around to other parts of the province, that's not helping us that live in rural Nova Scotia. And I heard the member from Pictou County earlier talking about what happens if we don't spend this money. Jobs will just come. Well, Madam Speaker, if we had a competitive province, if we were open for business, and we had lower power rates, we had lower taxes, and we had lower transportation costs, businesses may want to come here and not have to get the big handouts to get here. Businesses might talk to other businesses in the area and encourage them to come here, because we know we have the best workforce. Irving Shipbuilding has told us that. We showed that. They've won it on their merit. It's economics 101. Madam Speaker, we've heard that we've got $600 million invested in projects over the last little while. How many jobs are actually created? Stats we have is there's 1,300 jobs lost. Part-time jobs are gaining, full-time jobs are leaving. And we know people can't live on part-time jobs. Madam Speaker, economic development is essential in this province. But we need to do it in a way that's sustainable, that people just don't pack up and leave when they go. And we're thankful that Port Hawkesbury Paper got some government money to make sure they stayed open, but is there guarantees that they will stay open? Where does that equipment go if this Port Hawkesbury Paper does decide to shut down and pack up and take it with them? Is there guarantees that it stays here? Madam Speaker, they gave them 130-some million when Stern had to put 33 million into it, with no guarantees that that equipment would stay here. The most efficient equipment in the world, from what we understand, paper-making equipment in the world, with probably the best workforce, and we heard about the growth of Port Hawkesbury Paper, so we know they have the best workforce in the paper industry. But we want to make sure that stays there. Their power rates are the highest probably in the paper-making business. That's not conducive to them staying there. We have to make sure that Port Hawkesbury Paper is successful and stays here, not only for the people who work in the mill, but for the surrounding areas. We hear that the owner of the Home Hardware in Port Hawkesbury does better with his store in St. Peter's now than he does in Port Hawkesbury. We need to create a business climate that encourages economic development. As I said earlier, we need to lower taxes. We need to decrease our power rates. And Madam Speaker, we're hearing all kinds about renewable energy, and no one on this side of the House is against renewable energy. We want to make sure we can afford renewable energy. Madam Speaker, I'm from Cape Breton, and I'm very proud to be from Cape Breton, Madam Speaker. And every day I hear about this old, dirty imported coal to burn power. Well, if it's that dirty and it's that terrible, let's take it off the grid right now. And let's rely on our renewables and whatever we have, because you know what? Years ago we went off the oil on coal because it was cheaper. And now if we mine our own Cape Breton coal, we can get it cheaper again, and we get clean local coal and put people to work. That's economic development, Madam Speaker. We don't want to give a business just a straight-out handout to make them come here. Now, Madam Speaker, we want to buy those renewables we can afford them. We want to use natural gas. We want to use wind power. We want to use solar power. We want to use tidal power. But we want to develop that so Nova Scotians can afford them, so businesses can afford them. If businesses can't afford their power rates, out of business they go, and there's 2, 3, 4 jobs at a time we lose. And we're all for transparency, Madam Speaker. And we know that transparency, by definition, enables people to have a say in what affects them and answer any questions they might have. Madam Speaker, if this government was more transparent, we'd get the answers that we were looking for. We need a written summary of the economic development and the terms and conditions of each agreement. And that's great, Madam Speaker. That's really good, but we want to make sure we create jobs. We need bills in this legislature, not bantering back and forth between parties. We need to actually sit down and work and create jobs. How many jobs are we going to create by studying? You know, I can't stress enough how the rural areas in Nova Scotia, Cape Breton in general, needs jobs. We need, again, as I say, to make sure businesses want to set up here, but even better than that, we want to make sure that the businesses that are here stay here. And if some of them need some assistance, that's great. And sometimes it's just to get over a little hurdle. Now, that hurdle that we're trying to get over now is a 30% increase in our power rates in the last 4 years. Madam Speaker, most small businesses that are employing 2, 3, 4, 5 people, that hurts their bottom line. They can't expand. They can't move to another area. They can't hire more people. They can't increase their technology because they're paying the power rates. We need to make sure businesses want to come here. Jobs aren't just going to come here. Without the climate to make sure that people can set business up here, it's not going to happen. So although this bill sounds good, and we want to make sure that we can keep an eye on what's going on in the province, we want to concentrate more on creating jobs. Tax cuts work great, Madam Speaker, but we have to work on the tax cuts, like I say, with small business and increasing the threshold so they can make sure that they actually pay lower taxes. There's no incentive for businesses to try and produce more if they're going to raise the threshold and have to pay more taxes because of it. And I did also hear the member from Pictou County ask where the PC caucus was when Port Hawkesbury paper was struggling. You know, Madam Speaker, we were there, the whole caucus, and we met with all people from the mill. We met from union people to management, and met with the council and the mayors. And you know, we heard the same thing from all of them. This mill is essential for that area to survive. And it was off again, it was on again, it was off again, it was on again. I want to know if there's a guarantee that that mill will be there for 12 years, like the member said. There's no guarantee any of us will be here. Call an election, we'll see how many are going to be here. It's amazing that any business in the province can actually compete with the conditions they have. And we were talking about threats to jobs. And Madam Speaker, since this government's been in power, there's been no real threat to jobs. It's been jobs that have gone. The threat's not there, it's actually happening. And Madam Speaker, if this bill would put some transparency into what this government is doing today, then that's a good thing. But I don't know if this government would take this bill because I don't know if they want to see what's going on. And if we can create jobs, we're all for it. With that, Madam Speaker, I'll take my place.
Now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm delighted to rise in my place this evening to speak to Bill number 1. This bill is aimed at introducing transparency to economic development assistance packages developed and pursued by government. A Liberal government would end corporate handouts, would end the NDP practice of writing blank checks with no job guarantees, and would work towards diversifying the economy of Nova Scotia. In fact, Madam Speaker, I think this is exactly the kind of bill that the NDP would have championed back when they were in opposition. No one could express outrage better than the NDP when they were in opposition. They would have. I do believe we are, the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville is a little confused because we are, in fact, debating a proposal, which is what this bill is. Back in the day when they were in opposition, they would have been howling about corporate welfare bums, and now they're happy with it. They were continuously shocked and appalled anytime a government gave money to a company. And in fact, what they did was they turned around and gave money to companies, and they didn't even have to have any job guarantees. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. People voted NDP. They thought that the NDP was going to come in and do things differently. The Premier stood there at the debate, and he said that he could balance the budget without raising taxes. Now, we don't know what unicorn he rode in on. We don't know if he thought he had found a colony of leprechauns who had pots of gold. We don't know if he had found a way to turn, if he was an alchemist and he had found a way to turn Cape Breton coal into gold, but somehow the Premier thought that he could actually balance the budget without raising taxes. Now, you know what? It's amazing to me that crowd across the way bought that hook, line, and sinker. But they did. And then, of course, they had to climb down from it and had to climb down from it. They just promised that they could do it. And it didn't matter Well, actually, the Minister for Finance would know that if she actually read the bill, there is a plan. But you know what? She doesn't want to do that. She just wants to chirp across the way, same as the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville. What bothers the crowd across the way is that the Liberal leader wouldn't make a promise like their leader did, knowing he was going to break it. He wouldn't do it, and they can't handle that. So instead, what did the NDP do? They raised taxes, they raised fees, they gutted education, they slashed the election, advanced education, $1.5 billion
Order, please.
on.
The Honourable the member for Bedford Birch Cove has the floor. If ever people have conversations they would like to carry on, please take them out of the chamber. The Honourable the member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I often go out and knock on doors and talk to my constituents, and one of the things I hear from people is how shocked at how bad this government has been. They are shocked and appalled. They cannot believe. I mean, they took a leap of faith. They voted NDP, and they got Keystone Cops. It blows them away. They cannot believe it. This government, after howling about the slush fund for years, in fact, raised the money spent on it to new heights. They changed the name, but it's still a slush fund. No matter how you slice it, it's still a slush fund. This government has introduced strategy and framework after strategy with no goals, no targets, no timelines. It's just all airy-fairy. There are rainbows and there are unicorns and four-leaf clovers and fairy tales. And the culmination of that fairy tale, of course, was the budget, which only somebody who wasn't clued in would actually think was balanced. I mean, heavens.
When did you do it?
Order, please. The Honourable the member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So every day when they stand up at the House, the members opposite say, we're turning the corner, we're turning the corner. And we keep saying, to what? To what? Drive down Bedford Highway. There's building after building closed, shutting down, leaving. They're going, and you know why they're going? Because there's nobody buying, and nobody's buying because they have no money, because they have no jobs. The last time I ran for office in 2009, you couldn't find an open space on Bedford Highway. We were lucky we lucked in at the last minute in 2009. Now when you drive down Bedford Highway, there's all kinds of empty space, and that's because this government has failed in their job creations. But hey, don't take my word for it. Let's just look at the figures there. Let's just see what the unemployment rate is. Unfortunately, Statistics Canada does not do an unemployment rate just for Bedford. I realize that the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage may think that, but it doesn't actually work that way. And so if my sorry, I've misplaced the here we are, there we go. Let's just take a look at that. Let's just look at that. The unemployment rate for Cape Breton is 18.6%. The unemployment rate for the North Shore, 12.9%. The unemployment rate for Annapolis Valley, 11.5%. The unemployment rate for Southern Nova Scotia, 13.2%. And even though the rate in Halifax is lower than it is there, the fact of the matter is Halifax HRM is hurting as well, and all you have to do is drive down the street and look at the number of buildings that are empty, and then you know that this government has not done its job. So, this government has not done its job. It has put, you know what? If you had put money into companies with job guarantees, you wouldn't have run into those kinds of problems, but you didn't. You were handing out blank checks all over the place, and I know you don't like it when we point it out. I don't blame you. I'd be embarrassed if I were you too. But the fact of the matter is, they saw you coming. They saw you coming. I think if there are job targets, it's less of a problem. I think we've been through that already. I understand you have some problems with that. But you know, this bill would force companies to be accountable if they take government money. And I would think that the members opposite would think that's a good thing. Now, maybe they don't think accountability is a good thing. Certainly we've seen that they like to pretend that they're accountable when they try to hide information, like, announcing that we're going to drop our small business tax rate, and then, forgetting to mention that, you're going to drop the threshold as well, so that there are businesses who are suddenly going to have to pay that tax. Kind of forgot to mention that to the Chamber of Commerce, didn't you? This bill is aimed at introducing transparency to economic development assistance packages developed and pursued by government. And that's a good thing, Madam Speaker. That's a good thing. This government has taken a failed approach of corporate handouts to big companies and not require them to meet certain performance obligations. And that, to us, does not make sense. A Liberal government would end these kinds of corporate handouts, would end the NDP practice of writing blank checks with no job guarantees, and would work toward diversifying the economy of Nova Scotia and of communities across the province. Without a diversified economy and a strong economic system, Nova Scotia's economy will continue to flounder. And, Madam Speaker, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's what this crowd has been doing the same old thing, handing out money, don't require any jobs, let them lay off people, and apparently they're okay with that. So, Madam Speaker, if a company plans to take some money from the citizens of Nova Scotia, they should have to account for what happens to it. They must show what they are doing with it, how many jobs they've created, and Nova Scotians deserve nothing less. Thank you.
Now recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy. No, I
Is it?
No,
We missed out on this.
I now recognize the House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. That concludes the officials' opposition business for today. I certainly want to thank all members who have taken the opportunity to stand in their place and give remarks. And with that, I will call upon the Government House Leader to provide us with business for tomorrow.
Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
What's the out? Mr. Speaker, you know what? The member from Glace Bay is just an unending wealth of information. You'll find that guy's that good looking and that smart. Madam Speaker, Hours for tomorrow, Madam Speaker, will be noon to 6. And after the daily routine, we will do government bills for second reading, which will include Bill 36, 37, 42, 51, 54, 55, 57, and 59. With that, Madam Speaker, I ask you that we do now rise to meet from the hours of noon to 6 p.m.
Thank you. The motion is that we do now rise to meet again tomorrow, Thursday, April the 25th, between the hours of 12 noon and 6 p.m. All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We'll now proceed with the adjournment debate, a motion under Rule 5.5, as submitted by the Honourable Member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville, which reads, therefore, be resolved that the government should be congratulated on successfully achieving its back-to-balance targets and delivering a balanced budget for Nova Scotians. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, since I resigned as Finance Minister almost 1 full year ago, I have not taken a large part in the proceedings of the House. I no longer speak for the government because only a minister can do that, and I no longer speak for the Department of Finance. My focus is back on serving constituents in the constituency, which is where I started back in 2001. I was a little surprised when the gist of the Speaker's ruling yesterday was that I had never stood up in the House to state plainly that there was no intention on my part to mislead the House in the presentation of last year's budget. It's still not clear to me what opportunity there is for a government backbencher to make such a statement in response to a point of privilege. Nevertheless, and in any event, Madam Speaker, I'm taking the opportunity to do that now. Let me say plainly and directly, there was, in the presentation of last year's budget, absolutely, positively, no intention on my part to mislead the House. Building a $9 billion budget is an exceedingly complex process. It was my privilege to play a lead role in that process 4 times while I served as Minister of Finance. The process takes place over about 8 months. There are literally thousands of line items. The economic model used by the Department of Finance has over 600 variables. Everything is connected to everything else. There is new information coming in on these line items and these model variables all the time, every single day. As a result, in the preparation of a budget, there has to be a cutoff date. There has always been a cutoff date. There will always be a cutoff date. There is no finance minister ever who has stood up in this House with a budget that is up to date as of the day of the budget. That may be possible with a $9,000 budget or a $90,000 budget, but it is not possible with a $9 billion budget with thousands of line items and hundreds of variables, all of which are interconnected and on which new information is coming in every day. In the case of last year's budget, everyone agrees that the new information came in after the cutoff date. This was explained at length when the Department of Finance appeared before the Public Accounts Committee, and anyone who still has questions about that point should review the transcript of that meeting. The only question left then is whether the new information was material in the counting sense of the term, and again, everybody agrees that it wasn't. I know, Madam Speaker, that $27 million sounds like a lot of money.